So hi Suz, thank you for talking to me about the prints in our collection. I'm really excited to learn a little bit more about them.
Hello, well, I'm delighted to be here.
That's good news. I know you've been doing a lot of work on the prints lately, and I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about your research. I know you've been working with a lot of enthusiasts and specialists from around the UK and further afield.
Well, yes, I've got a total passion for everything Japanese, and I'm part of an online forum that sort of specialises in these Japanese woodblock prints. And so I've been able to post up images of the prints, and that sort of sparked off discussions. And people who know way more than me have been able to talk about them and point things out to me that I hadn't noticed.
Oh, brilliant.
In one case, doing some interesting translations. So it's a type of online research that I don't think has been possible before.
It sounds really exciting, actually. I mean, have you found out anything really exciting about the prints in our collection?
All sorts of things. Yes. Yeah, so this sort of international collaboration just wasn't possible before the internet.
That's very true. And I suppose with the current circumstances, we're finding out how useful that is.
Oh, yes.
So could you tell me a little bit about the Japanese prints? I mean, how did they come to be in our collection, and how old are they, and what kind of processes were involved in making them?
Well, these are all woodblock prints.
Okay.
Essentially, there were 3 people involved in the making of them.
Oh, right, okay.
The artist, then the person cutting the woodblock print, then the actual printer.
Right, okay. So it's quite an involved process then.
Oh, yes. They all date from, well, the earliest is late 18th century, most are early to mid-19th century.
Right.
One of them has an almanac from the 1860s pasted on the back, so we know they kind of left Japan before then.
Right, I see.
I think they probably left in about the 1870s, when there was a passion for everything Japanese in the Western world, and all sorts of Japanese art and artworks and crafts were being imported and brought to museums throughout the Western world and through the UK.
So we can guess that that's why they ended up in our collection.
Yes, it was a fashionable new type of art. No one had ever seen anything like it before.
And I know it started to influence Western artists, big name Western artists as well at this time.
Well, Van Gogh was particularly fascinated by these prints. He had a whole collection, a lot by Hiroshige, and he does, in one case, he actually copies a Hiroshige.
Really?
And in other places, you can see the way the construction of Hiroshige's work has obviously influenced Van Gogh.
Yes. It's fascinating. I mean, could you talk a bit more about the woodblock printing itself? I mean, does that involve painting directly onto a woodblock print and then pressing it into the paper? Is it as simple as that?
Essentially, it isn't simple.
Okay.
Yeah, there's some very, very highly skilled craftspeople involved in this.
Yes. High quality paintings and...
Yeah, they're creating some astonishing subtly effects.
So we can obviously see we've got a few very high quality prints in our collection. Are there any rarities amongst there, or are they all 10 a penny?
Well, they're not 10 a penny. No, we've got a very early Hiroshige, which I was very pleased to come across. One of my favourites is by Keisai Eisen, Oi of the Ebiya. It's a fantastic print of a high-class courtesan in the most fantastically elaborate kimono, parading in front of a flowering peony. And yeah, it is absolutely spectacular with vivid colours.
Wow, that sounds beautiful.
And I think this is one of the stars of the collection.
Yes. And I suppose it's not the most talked about aspect of our collection, and I suppose lots of our visitors might not know too much about Japan at this sort of time. I wondered if you could tell us a bit more about Japan in the 18th and 19th century. I mean, do our prints shed any light on Japanese culture and characters at this time?
Well, Japan had gone into isolation in the 17th century. Very few people from outside were allowed in, just some traders who came into special enclaves and didn't mix and mingle with the rest of the population. Japanese people couldn't leave. Essentially, the whole country was in lockdown. And,
right. Very appropriate.
Yeah, and a totally unique culture evolved. And at this time, so there'd been sort of years of peace, and the old samurai classes weren't particularly needed but still had their status. And the city of Edo, which is now called Tokyo, had developed a really lively, vibrant urban culture. The merchant classes had no social status, but they had the money and the enterprise, and to build up this very vivid sort of city life. And parts of it are absolutely recognisable to us now.
Yes.
There was fashion and celebrity culture.
Yes.
And people would leave the theatres and get some fast food on their way home. And other bits are utterly strange to us.
So I suppose the characters that we're going to meet in some of the prints today, are they a fair representation of the characters we would have met in Japan, courtesans and actors and that kind of thing?
Yeah, well, a lot of them were, the people in the prints are sort of the celebrities and the cultural icons of the time.
Okay, that's fab. So shall we have a look at our first print?
Yes.
Okay, so this first one that we're going to have a look at is by Kinchoro Yoshitora.
Yes.
Hope I'm saying that right. So its translated title is A Comparison of Silk Cultivating Beauties. So can you tell us a bit about what we can see here, Suz? What's going on in this scene?
Yes, this was one of a series of prints so showing the various processes of silk making. But the main feature of it is a beautiful woman who one presumes is working in that process, although presented in a highly idealised way.
Yes.
And this one, the woman is called Asamizu, and she's wearing a fantastic silk kimono with an elaborate hairstyle, which really I don't think any factory girl of that time actually would have worn. But she's sitting on a loom, and the background of the print is actually printed to look like freshly woven silk.
It's fabulous. So it's really a representation of an industry, I suppose.
Yes, and an idealised version of a worker in that industry.
And do we know anything about the date of this print?
Yes, it's between 1843 and 1846. Can't always be very precise because there's various date stamps. Sorry.
That's okay.
Changed every few years.
And do we think this one is an original print or a copy?
Oh no, this is definitely the original.
Brilliant. I can see some writing on the print. Do we know what that says?
Oh yes, well that was one of the most interesting parts of work with this online forum, because the writing on the print, it's sort of cursive script based on 19th century Japanese handwriting styles.
Wow.
And it's very, very difficult to read. And various possibilities for the name of the print were suggested and shared. And finally, someone in the forum passed it on to their Japanese calligraphy teacher.
Oh, fabulous.
And the teacher came up with Asamizu as the most likely reading of the woman's name, and also translated the poem that's written in there.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And it's about the making of silk, obviously. And the poem in translation reads, "Woven into silk, never looked to be that way, silkworms."
That's fantastic. And do we know anything about the printmaker himself, Yoshitora?
Yes, he's not a hugely well-known artist, but he certainly has an eventful life. His life sort of spans that time between Japan being in total cultural isolation and the time it totally started to wake up to the Western world and become interested in the Western world and want to embrace the latest technologies. So he started off, when Japan was still in isolation, and this is one of the prints he did at that time.
Yes.
He became involved in something of a scandal when one of his satirical prints was deemed to be disrespectful of the government. And he spent 40 days in manacles for that.
Wow, okay.
After which it seems that he was thrown out of the art school of which he was a member.
Right.
But he went on making prints, and towards the end of the life, and when this print left Japan, he was still working, and at the end of his life, he actually became a journalist on a Western-style newspaper.
Wow, what a change.
So he's totally straddled two cultures.
Wow. So these prints are having a real impact on people's lives. They're not just something that would be up on a wall and forgotten about. They were capable of causing scandal then.
Oh, yes. Yes, there were all sorts of subjects used, but a lot of them were sort of beautiful women and kabuki actors and celebrities. But you'd find prints commenting on recent events and satirical and comic prints.
So a whole range of subjects, really.
Oh, yes.
So that's a little bit like our next print here. We've got, this one seems to be showing a young sumo wrestler.
Yes.
And do we know anything about this sumo wrestler?
Yes, the Prince by Otagawa Toyokuni I, and it's sumo wrestlers Tanikaze and Daidozen Bongoro. Now, Daidozen Bongoro, he seems to have been a very brief celebrity in 1794. An 8-year-old sumo wrestler. And he was obviously the fad of the moment, because there are other prints showing him that all dated to 1794.
Right, okay.
So he was obviously the flavour of the moment. And in this print, this 8-year-old boy is showing off his strength and prowess by lifting a heavy weight in front of Tanikaze, who was a well-known adult sumo wrestler.
So was it usual for children of that age, that seems quite young, to be sumo stars, so to speak?
Well, certainly it's become a celebrity.
Right, okay.
They started training quite early, but...
And what sort of position did sumo wrestlers have within society at this time? Were they heralded as heroes, or were they cast aside, or somewhere in between?
Well, they were celebrities. The sumo wrestlers would live in schools, training up, eating immensely huge meals, and not very ceremonial about the wrestling bouts. They had their hair done in very specific ways, and salt was sprinkled before the bout to sort of make the area sacred. So it was partly sacred ritual and partly a manly popular sport.
So this is obviously a really popular topic then for a poster or print.
Yes, there are quite a few
So is this something that that fans of the sport would have bought and had in their homes? Do we know where this print would have been visible?
Well, because he was the brief celebrity of the day, I imagine all the people who were interested in him, basically it was cashing in on the current fad.
So a celebrity culture, and this print is part of that culture.
Yes. Yes, in many ways it's just so totally modern. You know, just as Hello magazine would sell extra copies for showing the celebrity of the day.
So that goes back to really what you were saying, that lots of the topics in the prints are quite recognisable, really, the themes. So let's move on to this next princess. This one's one of my favourites. So its translated title is The Summation of the Modern Benton, and it's by Hiroshiga, is that right?
Yes.
And can you tell us a bit more about the princess? Who was Benton, and who is this lady in the kimono?
Well, Benton, or Bentisen, was one of the seven lucky gods, the only female member, and she was sort of a goddess of music, and she was a much revered and much loved goddess. And in this print, the print itself, Chikubushima, it's called, which is the name of an island, which is in the background, showing the background of this print. The main image shows a woman. She's a courtesan from one of the high-class brothels in the Yoshiwara. And she's dressed in this fabulously elaborate kimono, outer kimono, under kimonos, very complicated and elaborate clothes, and with fantastic hair ornaments. But she appears to be sneaking a piece of paper out through the shutters of the room to somebody who is outside.
Do we know who the person outside is?
Yes, he isn't very distinct, but he is an old man, a travelling musician.
Oh, right, okay.
And it all links back to an old no play, also called Chikubushima. Chikubushima was an island which was a shrine of Benton. And in this play, a visiting dignitary wants to pay his respects at the shrine, and to get out to the island, he gets into a boat that belongs to a strange old fisherman, and there's a young beautiful woman, and they row out to the island, and gradually the pilgrim comes to realise that these two aren't human, and they finally reveal themselves that the old fisherman is the dragon king of the sea, and the young woman is Benton Zeiton herself. And so it's as though in this print Hiroshiga has taken that story and moved it into his contemporary world, and the courtesan becomes Benton herself, and possibly the old musician out the other side of the shutter is personifying the Dragon King of the Sea.
That's fascinating. You mentioned the Yoshiwara district of Edo. Can you tell us a bit more about that district? Was that a place where we'd find lots of characters like this?
Oh, yes. That was the pleasure quarter. It was somewhere outside Edo. You'd have to go across a sort of causeway to get to it. And that was where there's all the entertainments. There were theatres and all sorts of venues and eating places and tea houses. And there were the brothels. And I'm not sure the English word brothel quite encompasses what these houses were. Some of them were really, really famous. And the women who worked in them, the high-ranking courtesans, the Ovan, they celebrities. And they're wealthy women.
Yes.
And they'd be seen out with the most fantastic clothes, expensive kimonos, incredible hairstyles. And they were sort of almost the glamour image of the day. And people were copying their style.
So again, in this print, like we had with the sumo wrestler, it's almost showing off a fashion and a fad, although this one has a story behind it too.
Yes. Oh yes, a lot of these prints do show that the current fashion in kimonos.
So would you say then that with the Yoshiwara district and these courtesans didn't have the same kind of stigma attached to them as perhaps, say, in a Western culture, a brothel and a prostitute? It's a different thing altogether, perhaps?
Yes, in the official social status, they were pretty much down at the bottom, but the top ones, they were sort of important people in their time. Although obviously life was pretty grim for those on the bottom rank. The top ones would sort of employ young girls to train up as apprentices, who started out as being their maids, who would get them dressed and get their hair ready, and then they go on to take over in the profession.
Shall we move on to our next princess?
Yes.
Okay, so this is number 4, and this is from printmaker Keisai Eisen. Can you tell us a bit more about this one, Suz? The woman, it seems to be a typical example of the beautiful women you were talking about in the prints.
Yes, the genre print is called Bijinga, which means just images of beautiful women. Eisen was a real character, a very prolific artist. In his own autobiography, he described himself as drunken and dissolute. He claimed to have run a brothel, and I'm not sure how much self-mythologising is actually in here, but he was definitely a character around the Yoshiwara, and he just totally knew this district. And the Bijinga were his speciality.
So what do we think's represented by the women in this print?
Well, here we have a courtesan, again in rather a splendid kimono, and she's sitting down reading a letter, but the letter is blank. And behind her is the image of Takawana Aikido, which was at the edge of the city of Edo. There was one of the fortified gates, and this one led up to the Tokaido Road, which was one of the main highways of Japan, leading from Edo to Kyoto. And this area, there was a harbour area, there were places to eat, a market. And this was sort of traditionally a place where people would go to say farewell to people who were about to depart to Kyoto. So, she's reading that letter, so you sort of start thinking about the place and what it represents, what might be in the letter, what she might be reading, what she might want to read. And of course, her life is, the courtesan is very confined. She can't really leave the Yoshiwara. And this image of travelling out, and she can't travel, seems sort of relevant to these days, but...
Well, yes. So it shows really a confinement,
yes.
And a dream of travel, I suppose.
Yes, or dream of someone who isn't there at the moment, and who she reading a letter from, or wish she could be reading a letter from.
And I know a lot of the prints in our collection, not just the ones we're talking about today, but others show places and represent places through the industries that they were known for and that kind of thing. Is that right?
Yes, a lot of places had sort of symbolic meanings or cultural meanings. Like this one. But people at the time would have understood what it meant to go there. And
so at a glance, people could understand the print very simply, I suppose.
yes.
So our next print, Suz, is from Kunisada, and I know we have several prints from him in the collection. Was he an influential artist?
Yeah, he was the most prolific and successful artist of his day. He did produce lots of prints. He particularly won over his kabuki actors. Unfortunately, we don't have any of those. But he did design a huge number of prints. He always loves brilliant colours, lots of patterns. These are some of the most colourful and decorative of the prints. And in his day, he was one of the great stars. When the prince became known in the Western world, he was rather overlooked because he looked down on. Maybe because he was so successful and financially successful. I don't really know, but the art critics at the time sort of dismissed him. But he's undergone some huge revaluations in the 1990s. And he's now really known as one of the great printmakers of the time.
So what does this print show us, Suz? Can you tell us a bit more about what we can see here?
Well, this one is called Bishamonten, and it's from a series, the title which translates into English as The Comparison of Lucky Gods to Childish Treasure Ships. Now, there were 7 lucky gods. We've already mentioned Ben 10. This is another one, Bishamonten. And everyone in Japan would have known them. They were instantly recognisable. And they were used in a lot of prints, sometimes sort of slightly mocking, slightly satirical, other times sort of representing things that were going on at the time. And they were just totally known. And in this print, we have a woman in a very nice kimono. You can tell that her hobi, the sash around the kimono, is tied to the back, so she's a courtesan. And behind her is a small boy who is dressed as one of these gods, Bishamonten. Behind, in the background, there's a sort of roundel on which Bishamonten himself is shown in his usual way of a fearsome warrior. He was the queller of evildoers. In this case, there's a small boy who's dressed up as him. Who's dancing around behind the woman.
What's he holding, Suz? Do we know? Is it part of the dress
yes.
of Bishamonten?
Yes, it's some sort of symbolic banner, I think. Something that symbolises Bishamonten, anyway.
And so, given Kunisada's popularity, is it safe to assume that there would have been lots of this print created, or is this quite a rare print in itself?
Well, I know there's another print. There are other prints of this around, and none of them are particularly common, and they're well produced in huge quantities. Because these prints, this was always popular, affordable art. They were turned out in immense quantities. They were bought by pretty much everyone. They cost the equivalent of 2 portions of noodles from a street vendor.
I see.
So if you imagine cost of 2 McDonald's, what would that be, £10?
So quite affordable.
That's the equivalent.
So
everybody could have them and afford them. But they weren't seen as high art at all. It's only when they came to the West they were seen as high art.
Because they were unknown and it was a new thing. So we've got another print here. Our final print that we're going to discuss today is another by Kunisada.
Yes.
And this one's very beautiful. Can you tell us what we're seeing here? Is this the same as the Lucky Gods print, or is this to be used in a different way?
Yes, this one, its title is Tosei Usukisho, which translates as Contemporary Light Makeup. It dates from 1825. And to describe it as a woman in a very elaborate and quite hampering kimono. I'm not sure if she's a courtesan or a tea house girl, but she is negotiating a stepladder type staircase whilst holding what appears to be a bowl of tea, and is being hampered by her kimono. It doesn't look very comfortable for her.
No, it doesn't, does it?
But it is amazing print. And actually, this is a sort of perspective and construction that the Impressionists were really struck by. Because it just isn't like anything that they knew. And this print essentially is a fashion plate. It's showing the latest style, the Yoshiwara glamour, the style of makeup, the style of kimono that was the thing in about 1825.
I see. So it would have influenced other young women that saw it in the latest styles.
Bought it and studied it and tried to make their costume a bit more like the current trend.
So you mentioned the hairstyle, the makeup, and the costume here. So whether you say these were typical of the time, have we captured a moment in time where a new fashion has come about?
Yes, it's just, fashion evolves, and as always, people want to be fashionable and find out the latest styles, the latest ways of wearing things.
It's a beautiful kimono. It looks like it has some sort of fruit or something printed on the edging.
Yeah, it might be persimmons.
Oh, right, okay. Oh, it's very beautiful. Well, thank you very much for talking to us about those prints, Suz. That's been really interesting. Just to finish up, I suppose, could you tell us why you think they're an important part of our art collection here at Worcester? It's so different to the main bulk of our collection, really. Can you tell us, what you think of the collection, of the Japanese print collection, and why it's important?
Well, we don't have much in the way of art from other cultures in our collection.
That's true.
This is an example of a different type of art from another time, another place. And they give us a glimpse into this world.
And I suppose it also captures that moment of influence that you talked about.
Yes. Imagine you're living in Worcester back in the 1870s and 1880s, and you know about these amazing prints, but to see them, actually to see real examples, that would have been an absolute treat. And I expect some of the art students of the time would all come to the museum and come to see them and come to get ideas.
Yes, I suppose it's a very different way of drawing figures and forms, isn't it?
Yes, the whole construction and perspective, and just like the whole method of putting together an image. It's totally unlike anything the Victorians had seen.
Very true. Well, thank you very much, Suz. I hope you've enjoyed that as much as me. That was really interesting.
Thank you. It's been really good.
Thanks, Suz. Bye.